answer the question, who are you? Beyond giving your name, would you give your job title, your religion, your ethnicity, or maybe even your hobby? What makes you, you? Can you ever really express the simplicity and complexity of who you are, your existence, to someone else?
Trying to work out who we are is an almost impossible task. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or trying to touch the end of your finger with your own finger. We can never quite get there. Of course, other people can tell us who we are, but they only see us from the outside. We think we know who we are, but we only see ourselves from the inside. So we're left with this incomplete vision of ourselves. We are both an individual and a social creature, but we will never escape thinking about ourselves in identity terms. Identity is the theme that underlies so much of the conversations that are taking place today. From discussions around gay rights, Islamic freedom fighters, nationalists, and all the debates going on in university campuses as well as global politics, these are all driven by the concept of identity and identity politics.
I'm Michelle.
And I'm David.
And this video is about how our drive to complete ourselves spills over into the world of democracy, our culture, and politics. How today, our inner world, our emotions, our feelings, and our identity have become the cornerstone of communication and created a cultural crossfire.
Korea has earned a reputation for telling great stories around the world. Whether it's the Cinderella-themed K-dramas, hordes of Russian zombies, or the class consciousness of director Bong Joon-ho. Now imagine this, you're a television executive that has a great idea for a new drama. You've got a story, you've got a plot, you've got a great big budget, but now comes the question of identity. Do you have any women in it? Does it pass the Bechdel test? Are there any LGBT characters? Is there any ethnic diversity in your story? For some people, this is really important. Culture is not just about what we say, but it's about who says it. Identity has become a big and important factor in many of the creative cultural decisions that people around the world and Korea make today. Now, this might not seem too important when we're thinking about Korean dramas or Korean movies, but what happens when you take this very same principle and then start applying it to the world of global politics? That is when things start to get tricky.
Both culture and politics have embraced the notion of identity. Whether it's the release of a new book, the debut of a new pop group, the emergence of a political candidate, or the presence of a professor, individuals' identities have now assumed an unprecedented significance in our current age. This is not to say that diversity is new. It's not. It's the type of diversity that we're observing today that is new. Previously, we looked for diversity in class, social position, and sometimes race. Now, there's an ever-growing number of identities that need to be represented, recognized, and respected. And each identity brings with it a different amount of cultural capital in different environments. But how did we get here?
Michelle is right. In the 20th century, the great dividing line of most of politics was one of economic difference. Although there was a lot of complexity around the argument, essentially it boiled down to something like, if you were on the right, you wanted economic freedom, and if you were on the left, you wanted economic equality. So, for conservatives, there was the idea of a growing private sector and a small government. This was put forward by people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who said that the rising tide would raise all boats. On the left, however, they were arguing for increased workers' rights, increased wages, and the support of unions. During that time, we had diversity, yet most of the world was divided by terms of class. Were you upper class? Were you middle class? Were you lower class? Your identity on the political spectrum was one defined by your attitudes towards the economy.
Now the world has changed. Where it was once all about economy, now it's all about identity. Instead of exclusively championing the working class, the left now supports marginalized groups and intersectionality. They often favor an educated metropolitan elite capable of understanding and expressing these new ideas. Meanwhile, the right, which was once the home of the rich and wealthy, has now become the party for traditional values, national purity, and the lives of the working class.
So with this rising focus on identity, how does it affect modern politics, or the current notion around identity is to be changeable, flexible, and liquid. While some still hold that biology matters and there are many things beyond our control, the modern world requires us to have multiple identities defined by our various social interactions with other people. We are therefore defined by our workplace, our education, our gender, our sexuality, our nationality, and our various hobbies. Let's try and break all of this down with examples of two very different people.
Here's Grace. She's decided to vote in the upcoming American election, but it's not easy. First, she's Korean American, so she wants someone that will recognize her Asian heritage. Second, she's a student. She has student loans and debt. She's worked hard to put herself through college and wants there to be complete meritocracy when it comes to university admissions. Third, she's a Christian, so she wants politicians to respect and recognize her faith. Fourth, she's middle class and aspires to be a doctor, so is looking for politicians who recognize the importance of financial security. Does this make her a Republican or a Democrat? Who does she vote for based on the identity that society has encouraged her to express and realize? It's really difficult, and she's not alone.
This is Kyung-hoon. He's a Korean in Seoul and facing similar issues. First, he's a member of the MZ generation, so he wants someone that knows his language, his values, and his beliefs. Second, he's a member of the LGBT community, so he needs politicians to be aware of his sexuality and not consider his identity problematic. Third, he is a man, and gender has become a huge issue in Korea. He wants to know that if he's going to spend nearly 2 years of his life doing mandatory military service, his commitment will be recognized. Fourth, he's from the southeast of the country, a traditional conservative stronghold and home to many right-wing presidents. He wants politicians to recognize the cultural influence of his hometown.
After being told over and over again that his identity is paramount, is valuable, is the most important thing, how does Kyung-hoon then square all of this by selecting only one political candidate? It just doesn't seem possible. By focusing more and more on identity as well as the various intersections that we are all composed of, it becomes harder and harder to find somebody that ticks all of the boxes. So then which one becomes more important? Our religion, our sexuality, our nationality, our hometown. How do we make decisions? What influences human behavior? Who are we? We asked Dr. Youngbin Kim to help us try to explain some of this.
Identity includes both internal and external aspects. Let's start with the internal dimension first. An example would be basic knowledge. That is, as a Korean, do I have a basic understanding of the historical events that have shaped Korea? Am I able to articulate the core cultural values that are prevalent among the Korean people? Another example of an internal dimension of identity would be affinity for a culture. Do I like South Korea? Do I have a sense of fondness for its people? Do I have a sense of pride for various aspects of Korean culture? So both affinity and knowledge are examples of ways that identity can manifest inside of me. But identity also manifests externally. Let's go back to the example of that sense of fondness for Korea. Liking Korea can translate to things like enjoying Korean food, listening to Korean music, enjoying watching Korean TV shows, or even speaking the Korean language. These are examples of behaviors that are readily observable by others. In sum, the exploration of identity should include both intrapersonal dimensions such as affinity and knowledge, but also external dimensions such as behaviors that are closely related to those internal dimensions. Identity is important for psychological well-being. One reason that it's important is because it connects the individual to others who are similar to them. It allows for a sense of belonging. It makes the person feel like that they're not alone in this world. So a powerful reason that identity is important is because it contributes to the well-being and life satisfaction of the individual. That is why in this age of increasing social isolation, sometimes healthy identity development is difficult. A big question for us then is to think about how we can help young people develop a healthy sense of identity, even in the face of risk factors such as the use of social media. Yes, having the freedom to choose and express an identity can be incredibly empowering for the individual. We can see many examples around the world of individuals who have freely chosen an identity without the restraint of others' expectations, and how that was a truly liberating process. For For certain identities though, the individual's freedom to choose an identity can be in tension with the community's norms and expectations. Let me use K-pop as an example. Let's imagine a hypothetical situation where a K-pop band forms exclusively with non-Korean members. One day a member of this group stands up during an interview and says, "I'm now going to claim Korean as my ethnicity." Chances are the person is free to express this, free to claim this identity as their own, but the expectations of the community and the norms of the community might not allow the community to see that identity in the same way. And so again, when you think about the tension between group norms and group expectations and the individual freedom, that has to be taken into account for certain identities.
Key breakthroughs of modern cultural studies and psychology came from a 2007 paper by Professor David Matsumoto called Culture, Context and Behavior. Now, in this paper, Dr. Matsumoto argued that all humans have an innate desire to live. Therefore, we seek shelter, we seek food, we seek warmth, we seek things to drink. We want to live, but here's the thing. Each environment that humans live in poses a very set of specific challenges and problems. So, the desert is very dry and hot, the fjords are dreadfully cold, and the jungles, well, they're wet, damp, and full of all these creepy crawlies that want to bite you.
And it's not just about the geography either, it's also about time. Living in Seoul in 2023 is very different from 1823, and the challenges of living in London in 18th and 20th centuries are completely different.
So, each environment that we live in poses a set of challenges. In order to surmount those challenges, humans invent a solution. That solution is what Matsumoto calls culture. Culture is a specific solution to a specific problem given the tools available to us. So the hanbok, the hanok, the hijab, aegyo, democracy, Christianity, hip-hop, anything that you can think of and name as a culture, that is what Matsumoto calls a solution to a problem.
Let's make this more specific and find some examples. Take America and its transition away from segregation. In the past, society was segregated along ethnic and racial lines. People of different races went to different schools, drank from different fountains, and married different people. In order to live together, this problem needed to be solved. One of the key arguments that moved us away from a society of racial divisions was made by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In his famous speech and many other works, he argued that people should be judged not according to any physical characteristics over which they had no control, but rather by the content of their character. This form of colorblindness became a specific solution to a specific problem, and thus became a new culture adopted by most of society.
This is where things get a little bit more difficult because I'm going to introduce some Hegel as well as the concept of dialectical materialism. You see, culture is a solution to a problem. Humans adopt certain behavior patterns because they work and help us survive, but each solution contains within it internal contradictions that will be revealed over time. Contradictions that are not immediately visible, but rather become evident as we progress. So what was once a solution then becomes a problem, and that problem then requires another solution. And this is how culture keeps changing and our visible world keeps moving forward.
Back to Dr. King. If colorblindness and equality of all people were the solution to segregation, that too contained an internal contradiction. We realized that in reality, not everyone was equal. We all harbored different tastes and values. Some were recognized in society more than others. Some faced harsher treatment, and some were privileged. For many people, colorblindness became a problem. The solution? Color consciousness. Instead of ignoring our differences, we started focusing on them. We started telling people what it means to be a woman, to be black, to be Asian, to be white, to be Christian, to be gay, to be male. This has helped people be seen and respected, to help them find solace in their identity. And while today, for many people, it is a solution to a problem, and thus a culture based on identity, it too will present challenges that we must at some point address. For example, if we focus on our differences and lived experiences, we will find ourselves more and more estranged from each other, further from other people, individual, but alone.
And this helps explain why that despite the increased material conditions, the improved technology, the reduction of war, the rising out of poverty, many people still experience great alienation. They feel alone.
Rising rates of depression are well publicized, as have the increasing deaths of despair from drugs, alcohol, and suicide. Hate crimes and murder rates are increasing, while charity donations are decreasing. Our modern world is characterized by words like conspiracy, polarization, trauma, and safe spaces.
All of this means that the internal contradictions to our previous cultural and political solutions are now starting to become visible.
What we have learned so far is that the current age is defined by the inner self taking precedence over the external systems of society. Who and what we are is important.
In the past, it used to be a case of humans adjusting the financial and political systems to better distribute economic and material goods to people. The growth of South Korea and Japan in the 20th century was about making the country rich and how to improve the lives of the collective, even if that meant many people were ignored or treated unfairly as modernization and gentrification ripped through neighborhoods and communities. The system was the driving force.
Now, however, we have the reverse situation. People have decided that the most important factor is their own inner lives and are demanding that the system adapt to fit their identity. It's not enough to find yourself. People want to be seen.
But if we promote or focus on one group, we will naturally ignore or neglect another group. It becomes impossible to represent every identity because not only are identities endless, we also live in an environment where different identities will carry different cultural capital. If you're in Midwest America, downtown Seoul, Osaka, New Delhi, Budapest, or San Francisco, the promotion of different identities will bring you different levels of political, cultural, and financial support. So where our leaders used to argue for different economic systems, now they are promoting or attacking group identities. Effort to recognize everyone now means we're seeing increased marginalization and the rise of the politics of resentment.
There doesn't seem to be an easy way out of this. What's this got to do with you or me? To help us connect some of these dots, we talked to different experts to try to help make sense of this situation.
Because I've been teaching students who are interested in international affairs, students themselves, I haven't seen much of the tendencies of so-called exclusionist nationalist stance in that group. Rather, I would say Korean politics. Korean political circles and Korean media, there have been rise of nationalist sentiments for a particular group. There has been growing division, I think, because looking back, since you said about 2 decades, 2.5 decades ago, there's a big case of anti-Americanism. This anti-Americanism that has its root in 1980s student movement, my generation of it, in fighting against the dictatorial regime that was supported, at that time our generation believed, supported by the US government. So in fighting for democracy, our generation had specific this kind of negative feeling towards the United States, and that continued on, I think, until 20-something years ago. But since then, what we see is a rise of nationalism, exclusionist, certain specific stance towards other powers like Japan and China. Increasingly so, and more so recently, driven by particular political groups in Korean society. What I'm saying is, for the last 20 years, the trend that I see is nationalism being used and abused for political reasons, political purposes. That, I think, is clear. And going back to your question of young generation, I'm talking about the people that I care about and interact inside classrooms. I haven't seen much of the distinction. They've been consistently kind and gentle towards the world community, and they've been genuinely interested in understanding world community. Korea will have to overcome a nationalistic stance. In dealing with the critical issue of fast declining population, for instance, I'm one of those people who strongly believe that we have to open up immigration. We will have to become successfully dealing with nationalism and becoming more globalist, becoming more accommodating of the people of different origins and so on. So normative argument I do have. Domestic side, if I may add here, I'm one of those people who believe academics like Robert Putnam in his book of Upswing, those people who argue that identity politics on one hand, and then laissez-faire liberalism, like free market, Chicago School, together with identity politics, people who believe in identity issues like, say, let's enhance the rights of ethnic minorities, gender minorities, and so on. As a liberalist, I do deeply care about human freedom, but at the same time, those people who argue that these identity politics have gone a little bit too far in contributing to the disintegration of the society rather than emphasizing the communitarian cohesion of the society. I have the same concern and worries about Korea. In seeing recent cases of gender division in Korea and generational division in Korea, the ideological division between progressives on one hand and then conservatives on the other, destructing the system of trust for making collective decisions for the people, which I call is a real function of politics. When I see this polarization of politics, polarization of identity groups and so on, I hope they do not continue, go on too long, too far. Those are the concerns I have in my mind in terms of looking at the future.
As well as experts, let's learn from stories. Take this tale of Hans from Francis Fukuyama's 2018 book, Identity.
Consider the situation of a young peasant, Hans, who grows up in a small village in Saxony. Hans' life in the little village is fixed. He is living in the same house as his parents and grandparents. He is engaged to a girl whom his parents found acceptable. He was baptized by the local priest, and he plans to continue working the same plot of land as his father. It doesn't occur to Hans to ask, "Who am I?" since that question has already been answered for him by the people around him. However, he hears that big opportunities are opening up in the rapidly industrializing Ruhr Valley. So he travels to Düsseldorf to get a job in a steel factory there. Hans is now living in a dormitory with hundreds of other young men like himself coming from all over northwestern Germany. People speak in different dialects. Some of the people he meets are not German at all, but Dutch or French. He is no longer under the thumb of his parents and local priest, and finds people with different religious affiliations than those in his village. He is still committed to marrying his fiancée, but tempted by some of the local women he has met, and he feels a bracing sense of freedom in his personal life. At the same time, Hans is troubled. Back in the village, he was surrounded by friends and relatives who knew him and would support him in times of sickness or a bad harvest. He does not have that kind of certainty about the new friends and acquaintances he has made, and he's not sure that his new employer, a big corporation, will look after his interests. The newspapers are full of conflicting stories about fights in the parliament, and he is not sure whom to believe. Hans suspects that all of these quarreling political parties are selfish and not interested in representing him. His part of Germany has become part of an enormous Reich of which he can feel proud, but one that is barreling forward to an uncertain future. He feels lonely and disconnected from his surroundings. He feels nostalgia for his village, but does not want to return there, as that would be a sign of personal defeat. For the first time in his life, Hans can make choices about how to live his life, but he wonders who he really is and what he would like to be.
When I first heard that story, I saw myself in it. I'm not a German peasant and I wasn't born in the 19th century, but I could feel what Hans was feeling, and I know that struggle. That desire for freedom, and yet at the same time, the suffocating aloneness that it brings. The mistrust and apprehension of society. Where are the familial bonds? Where is the place in life that makes us feel safe, secure, and seen?
We're all so different in so many ways, but the fundamental structure of the human mind is uniform across existence. Variations in culture are but different dialects of the same single speech uttered by the human soul. And if we take that into account, then sometimes the most important thing is not a perfect solution or a fantastic destination. Instead, it's the journey and the friends we meet along the way.
And there's still that one question that bugs me. With all the freedom, all the choice to create, construct, and communicate our own identity, are we truly liberated? Is Hans really free?